Welcome back to the Land Bulletin podcast, where every other week we bring you experts in the field to impart their knowledge when it comes to the ranch and sporting property market, buying and selling advice, the latest best stewardship practices, as well as topics that impact landowners every day. I'm your host, Haley Murr. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Land Bulletin podcast. I'm Haley Murr. I'm the host. And today we have Duke and Woody Beardsley on our show to discuss about their connection to the West through their family's heritage, growing up in Colorado, and kind of where the career paths have taken since then. And both of them have really kind of gone down these paths of representing the story and the legacy of the West through their different mediums. So I'd love to introduce both of you. Duke Beardsley, welcome to the show. And Woody, thank you for coming back on.
Hi, Haley.
Hey, Haley. Good to be here.
Well, I'd love to start first with, a lot of people are moving out west, moving to Colorado, moving to these different states, but not a lot of people, we call them unicorns, have a family history as long as you guys do with Colorado. Do you mind telling us a little bit about the Beardsley family history in Colorado? I'll start with you, Duke.
Wow, I was going to pass it over to Woody. He's this dope kid. Yeah, we've been around a while, maybe not as long as some like to give us credit, but I think we're pretty steadily fifth generation on both sides, which is kind of cool. But Woody, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we waited till the railroad mostly.
That's right. Our generation is fifth generation on both sides, Beardsley, and my mom's family was Newton. She's at Davis, but it was Newton family, and the Newtons and Beardsleys both came in the 1880s.
Yeah,
and that was 5 generations ago. And we're probably the 1, 2, 3, third, or in one case fourth, other case third born generation.
That's awesome. And it's fun too, like working with the tolls on Toland up in Netherlands, that same kind of connection with, these long family histories in Colorado and just seeing where it's come today. And was your family heavily involved in ranching since you guys were kids and things like that? Or is this kind of a new kind of second generation deal?
Dad's family, the Beardsleys, are the ranching side mostly. There was some ranching on the Newton side as well. But correct me if I'm wrong, Wood, I think our great-grandfather was the first real ranching Beardsley, I would guess. And then, of course, our grandfather and our dad and now us. So it's been around almost as long as we have. Am I missing anybody, Wood?
Nope. And then there was a same generation fellow named Whit Newton who had a big ranch above Pagosa on the East Fork of the San Juan. And that was a big legacy ranch that, in fact, Conservation Fund helped acquire and get into the hands of the Forest Service years back. So been ranching on both sides of the family.
What kind of connections? I know you guys are really connected with Summit County and that kind of area. Where other kind of parts of Colorado did your family settle in or ranch in around the state?
Well, on the Beardsley side, our great-grandfather was the mayor of Westcliff and was involved with a big ranch south of Westcliff, back then known as the JM Ranch, and more recently known as Wolf Springs. And they were involved in all kinds of things. Family was partners in the bank, partners in the dairy, involved in a bunch of different properties, and were pretty solid citizens in both Westcliff and Silvercliff. Our great-great-grandmother was born in Silvercliff. She's a Swanson. And so we've got 5 generations in the Rosita Cemetery there. So that would probably be the most direct. Westcliff and the Wet Mountain Valley, probably the most direct immediate location. Years later, family they all moved, and we had a ranch when we were kids growing up out in southeast Douglas and southwest Elbert counties, out in the Black Forest, kind of southeast of Franktown.
So I would love to know, when you guys were kids, your career path, Duke now as an artist, and Woody, you as a conservation-minded broker, kind of where did all this kind of start? Can you think back to like a time when you guys were kids where you kind of were inspired by the landscape around you guys? It's probably not like a pinpointed thing, probably just like an overall ethos, but I'll start with you, Duke.
Yeah, for sure. Overall, I mean, just the whole vibe and growing up, being exposed to that life, it was also kind of parallel to our lives in the city as city kids. So for me, it was a very informative and defining piece of what I came to do. I mean, putting a contemporary modern art spin on a very traditional subject like the Western genre I think, is a direct result of growing up with kind of a foot in either camp. I call it my dual upbringing, and you can decide how to spell dual because there were times when it was harmonious and times when it's combative. But yeah, certainly for my own interest, anything to do with horses, um, working cattle on horseback, which is kind of my focus artistically in many ways, or at least always was. And just being out on the land with family, with animals, that was a kind of an ethos that made a big imprint. And it took me a while to figure out that that's what was driving a lot of what I ended up doing artistically. But now I see it as a very strong, direct connection to that exposure as a kid, for sure.
When we were kids, and I'm 6 years older than Duke, so my memories of, say, what we used to call Beardsley Ranch, which was out in Douglas and Elder County, maybe a little different than Duke's. Maybe more occurred more during my, say, formative years than, say, the ranch that we shifted to up in Summit, where Duke was involved early on as a young adult and/or late teen. I can't remember the years there, Duke, but when we used to go to Douglas County, I mean, Denver ended at the Continental Theater at Hamden. I mean, it was really a stark change, and you would actually have to go through a little agricultural town of Castle Rock or Parker, and Franktown was an implement dealership, and that was about it. Four
Jeez.
Corners, an implement dealership, and subsequently in our lifetime, and particularly while we were growing up, the booms that have come and gone in Denver were very visible. And for me, that was a huge piece in forming my sense of where we were, what we were doing to it, and why, and wishing it wasn't so. I mean, there's a lot that's informed my career as both an environmentalist, a conservationist, and as a ranch broker. That was informed by those early years, watching the city expand and what I thought was lovely countryside shrink away, and it's sticks with me to today. I mean, that hasn't changed. That's still going on. Right.
Yeah, I'm sure your mom, I know she's kind of downtown now, and just to see everything kind of grow up around her, it's probably even more jarring.
Although it was interesting, she chose to be downtown when she recently moved down there because, well, it's Denver, and I recognize Denver, even though so much of it's new and changed. But to think about moving to an apartment or something out south, she goes, I just don't know where I am out there. So yeah, that's still part. Knowing where she is a big piece of what we grew up with.
Yeah, I love that. And are most of your family is still in Colorado, right? Is that the case?
Our immediate
Uh,
family, yeah, all four of us.
we're all
I
Yep,
love
we're
that.
all back. There were some stints in California for both my sisters and myself, and I also did a long stint in Montana in the '90s, and but we're all back in Colorado.
Awesome. And I'd love to know now, kind of getting into like the not the spirituality of it all, but legacy. And when we talk about kind of legacy ownership here at Murr Ranch Group and family and generational, Duke, I'd love to know, starting with you, how you're preserving kind of this cultural identity of the West and legacy through your art, and how you've seen, I don't know, even the art scene change a lot through the years, and kind of representing this kind of story of the West and how it's changed over time.
That's a fun question because I've just recently, in the last year or so, really come up against that word legacy a lot, and and I find it interesting and intriguing, and also it kind of I don't know, I find it challenging or almost a little bit resistant. I'm curious. I mean, I obviously, if you look at some of the more representational work I do, featuring working cowboys and cowgirls horseback, specifically working ranch work of today, um, I do see that as representing a tradition, and in that respect, the legacy of Colorado's working ranch heritage. But at the same time, I've made a very clear decision to look at this beloved iconography with a very modern and contemporary twist, to take the aesthetics of the more modern art movement of the 50s, 60s, and 70s and into postmodernism, and then look at this beloved traditional iconography. So at the same time, while I can't help but love it and perpetuate the tradition and the legacy, I'm also decidedly challenging it. And more every day, that I'm becoming more aware of how hard I've been pushing to see this be something that I've never seen it be before, but still remain recognizable. And I'm grateful for my great dumb luck that the Western genre can and has endured so many years of people imagining it and reinterpreting it and worshiping it, right? Because you can collapse under too much love too. So um, I don't necessarily think of myself as a champion of the legacy. And then about that word, I'd love to. I had a really great encounter with none other than Pete Coors once, challenging me in his lovely, easy way to understand what anyone means when you talk about the legacy of the West. And Pete is an accomplished guy on so many fronts, and very much himself a representative of a longstanding Western family. And he was talking about, with very clear ease, about who owns the legacy of the West. And I came away from it thinking, I don't know that I understand it the way he does, or if he understands it the way I do. But it really forced me to think, who does own the legacy of the West? And I've come up with my own version of it that is a little different, maybe. But Woody's and my Western heritage, we had nothing to do with that in many respects. In most
Zero.
respects, oh, we were decisions. I'm out of here. I'm not going to be a Westerner. Well, we could make those decisions, but this fifth generation stuff, we had nothing to do with that. And
Well, legacy actually for me was a loaded word, and
very much
recognizing that we are an immensely privileged and fortunate family. We come up from a long line of miners and bankers and real estate developers and lawyers, and you learn to
ranchers.
read and write so you can write law and count money, and those things are, you look around and the implications of those generations are not small, and they're not without impact, both on the land and with other people. And I spent an early part of my career trying to kind of either undo or outdo that legacy, in the sense of, if you could count up the acreage of Vale and Copper and Inverness and these places that have been developed in my lifetime, and I'd watched change from being these relatively pristine wild places into commercial, industrial developed zones. I was going to protect as much ground as we had inundated, or that those areas had been inundated. It wasn't very realistic, but it was an important piece driving my consideration of what's going on. And I've spent some time wanting to better understand the mechanisms, the jurisdictions, the laws, and the that drove and or continue to drive those legacies. Legacy of Conquest is a wonderful title from Patty Limerick. Had that, what is it, the Western, I can't remember the name of the
She was the chair of
center, up the Center for the West up at University of Colorado. And it is I want to say it's an important legacy. I don't want to aggrandize it, but it's certainly informed my thinking and my career as a both environmentalist and as a real estate person interested in land use and real estate.
But to that point, what he's making, and I think what I started to think about with Pete Coors was, for those of us who had a lot of our Western legacy heritage brought upon us and then made our own decisions eventually, I think I fine tuned it, and my expression now says, I don't care if you've been here 5 generations or 5 minutes, if you're wearing a turban or a Stetson, if you chose the West, and by the way, Raj Chaudhry, the very fine artist from Denver,
Oh,
who's a
love him.
Western landscape painter, who was born in India, who's just fabulous. So if you've chosen the West and you were the one who made that transition to the West, ours happened generations ago. But if you did that last month and you've chosen this place to be you're in charge of your Western life, then you own the legacy, along with us and everybody else who's made this their home. And you inherit you inherit a lot that you don't have anything to do with, but there it is.
To that same point, I've taken been great fun watching Ed Roberson with his Mountain and Prairie podcast. Ed, also a conservationist, also a ranch broker who was formerly with Murr Ranch Group, and to watch him take that podcast and do some really wonderful investigation, research, and expansion of people's thinking and discussion of it has been. I just love that podcast.
Cool.
And he's from North Carolina, and he's the first generation transplant to the West. He's the first to admit it, but look at what amazing contribution he's making with that podcast.
He's a
Oh, it's
voracious.
huge. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's great.
he reads more than I do, and I read a lot.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know. I thought my
He
dad read a
reads a hell
lot,
of a
but
lot more than I
Ed
do.
read, yeah. Well, I think that's brings up a great point, guys. I think the West, what's really great about the West is it does offer this opportunity for people to create their own legacy and to like kind of build on what people before them have done. And you guys have done a great job of that. And I think as ranch brokers too, it's stewarding those people into kind of their own legacy and making sure they have the tools to do it in the right way so that these landscapes can stand the test of time. But I love to hear that. It's we talk about your guys' family history and how long you guys have been here, but you're each making your own legacy through your art and through your lasting conservation efforts, Woody. So I love that you guys kind of brought that up. And it's something to consider even in our own marketing when we talk about that legacy, when we talk about people.
Well, look at your average broker for you guys, right? It's not just buying a ranch for ag anymore. You
Mhm.
got, like Woody and so many of your brokers, everybody sees this from so many angles and sees all the reasons that someone might be wanting to buy a ranch aside from agriculture. So I think it's a testament right then and there. This is so different, and that's I think what I eventually discovered. I didn't want to paint Charlie Russell's West. As much as a Western lifestyle as Woody, I've had the great privilege of living. I never roped a bear or fought over a water hole. This isn't Charlie Russell's West. I grew up in the 1970s and 80s of suburban Denver.
But you never spent any time looking at Charlie Russell paintings, though, did you?
No, never. But it's such a testament. The West changes under our feet every day, and it's still a very inviting, romanticized place. So, kind of amazing how it just keeps enduring.
How are you seeing kind of this change and this scope in the art scene of like Western art? Are you excited about where it's headed? Are people kind of taking these stories and creating even more kind of platforms for it in your line of work too?
Well, I'm very excited. I think this question comes up a lot, or some version of this question comes up, and I'll give you my basic thing. And that if this is Western art, I'll get it in the screen. If this is Western art, I don't see this happening. I don't also see that necessarily happening. The boundaries of Western art have been established. They're very strong, very beloved. It's one of the most beloved and has endured, in my opinion, the most of most American art genres. And it was ridiculed as being provincial for a long time, and regionalistic. But within Western art, again, there is this. We've seen everything: abstraction, surrealism, representationalism, still life, figurative, all of it. So it's a very strong genre. But what I have noticed is if this is Western art again, remember this hand is here. There's been this little emergence, now big emergence of contemporary Western art. So again, art influenced by a much more modern and contemporary aesthetic and mindset, whereas traditional Western art was steeped in the traditions of figurative European art. So it's a very exciting time, I think, as the West continues to change, and population being probably the biggest driver of that change, in my opinion, in my lifetime anyway. So it's a very exciting time. I wouldn't try to hazard a guess as to where we're headed, But I like where we are, and I like being a part of it. It's great.
And I'd love to know from your guys' perspective. Okay, there's people that are moving to the West. You talked about Castle Rock used to be this provincial kind of agricultural community, and now it has like, all of those super shopping malls and things. As these people come to the West, there's a lot of really good ideas. There's a lot of good people coming out here. But what are the things as people that love, Colorado, the landscapes, the iconography, all of it? What is some of the advice that you give people moving out West who are maybe thinking of purchasing a ranch or, what to be enveloped in the culture? I know that's kind of a broad question, but I feel like you guys are the ones to kind of think about that deeply as Beardsley Brothers.
You've been to Colorado, bring some water.
Yeah. But the danger, and it's more not necessarily any one individual coming here, but the sheer numbers. I mean, it's kind of a classic adage. We can love it to death, and you can ask yourself, but you don't have to be from here. You can be fresh off a boat from Ohio or wherever, and you could spend 3 hours in a line of traffic in I-70 trying to get to Copper Mountain and decide this really sucks. And that doesn't take a lot of intuition or insight or knowledge of the West. But I do think that what I love about being a ranch broker, and what I've always loved about land conservation, the people involved, but also the diversity of experience. There are so many different, what kind of ranch is it? Well, I mean, there are lots and lots of kinds of ranches, and certainly the economics of that have changed. And you might say that some of the economics of ranching never made a lot of sense to begin with. And so it's been a difficult proposition for a long time. But particularly as you're advising someone looking at getting into it, I love being able to help them come to understand the breadth of the opportunity. And whether it's kind of true ag, production property, or recreation property, or something with water, there's such a diversity. And also in the process of that, explaining to them, I'm a big advocate and not apologist for conservation, why I think that's the long-term value play. And, the old Will Rogers adage, or whoever was, name was Mark Twain, they aren't making any more of it, is true. And that, conservation, most of the conservation in Colorado is, or at least the agricultural conservation, the rural ranch conservation, is making an effort to keep the ranch a ranch. Change is inevitable. A fire will come, the rocks will slide, things will roll over. Nothing stays the same. But once we inundate a place to curb and gutter in the blade and make it urban or commercial or industrial, it's very hard to imagine it going back. Certainly that's a humanist mechanism, wanting to see it a certain way. But I think I can show almost anyone in any landscape why the long-term play towards conservation is ultimately the long-term value play. And I enjoy doing that.
Along the lines of how Woody was saying when he started, that the definition of what a ranch is has changed so much. I think that's kind of the spirit of what I think a lot of contemporary Western artists are trying to do, which is to say, this is still this very inspirational and empowering place to be an artist and to embrace its culture, but it isn't necessarily what it's always been. And there's so many new vibes and so many new, so much of what drives me design wise and color wise and theme wise is a product of this growth we're talking about, this evolution and change. So I think that diversity that you're seeing in the definition of what is a ranch, who is the West, all those kinds of things are just so important to realize that this has always changed. It's never been the same. I mean, go west and grow old with the country, right? It's an interesting grow up with the country, I guess is what he technically said.
Yeah.
Not sure if we have grown up, but I do think it's impressive to watch this continue to evolve and change and accept its own place in its own time, and yet try to honor its traditions. And it's just a fascinating place to find yourself working in really, as we can see, in so many different areas.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love it too, what you're saying with, the influx of people that have moved here, but are still wanting to kind of understand the West and understand what it means. I think for the majority of people who are moving here, it's for a reason, and they do want to kind of figure that out. And I think the Coors show was a huge representation of this. The amount of art that was sold this year at Coors was the most it's ever had. And the fact that there continues to be this interest in understanding the story of the West through different mediums, I think is really telling and exciting.
Yeah, I agree with you. It was great fun to be a part of it. That the storytelling, you've mentioned that several times. The storytelling aspect of Western art has always, for me, been what hooked me. I'm a
Mhm.
very visual person anyway, but when I started to connect the visuals with the story they were telling, um, I think I was kind of doomed to be in this line of work at a very young age because those stories just shook me so hard. And, exposed to that stuff as a very young age and realizing what it meant, realizing now that a lot of it was even then kind of romanticized. One of my all-time favorites, in fact, everybody's all-time favorite, Frederick Remington, painted 90% of his work in a studio in New York. And he'd only been west 2 or 3 times in his whole life, right? And yet he was the standard bearer of Western imagery and Western art storytelling for so long. So it's always been the mythology. What's the great quote, Woody? When the man meets the myth, print the myth, or whatever the story is. It's there's
Well,
a
and that whole thing to story. I mean, so much of it's about inspiration, and whether it's that drive to Copper Mountain or a drive across the San Luis Valley or down the front from Fort Collins of Pueblo, and even if you're going through suburbia or the development at the time, the landscape itself is inspiring. You're seeing 150 miles distance, and you're seeing these gorgeous peaks, these prairies, and the lights going across it, and you can't, regardless of where you're from or regardless your background or your history there, you can't not be inspired by this remarkable place. And then that's just here in Colorado, but it's all over, and it kind of begs that inspiration or that storytelling. You go out there and you find out there's people out there carving a living in this place, and whether it's Arapaho and Cheyenne peoples from before, or some miners, or some transplanted kids from Ghana who are working at the city market in Frisco. It's it makes you want to know what's going on, and it's very much it's infectious, and I think that really is born of the place. It 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 inspires us to want to know.
Mhm. And I gotta know, you guys have mentioned a lot of quotes and a lot of authors and where do you is this from, like, growing up together and kind of reading things, like reading books together? What is this like? Because I need to know, because I need to start to read these things and have these quotes sent into my brain too.
Well, I myself resisted a first-rate education from the get-go, and a lot of really good was just jammed down my throat, and I think I got it through osmosis. But again, I think it's that inspiration that the place makes you want to know more and find out more about it. And uh, Duke's reading a great book right now by John McPhee about the geology of Wyoming, and you pick that thing up, and it makes you want to drive to Rollins and hop a stage to you know Love Ranch, and it's just it's a so
Well,
anyway.
like Ed Robertson, he's always talking about his readings. Woody's selling until short. He voracious reader and been a real inspiration and source of books to read my pretty much my whole life, especially my adult life. But like the place, there's a lot about this that's been written about the West. Woody already mentioned Patty Limerick's book, one of the great of all time. If you're new to this, you don't read A Legacy of Conquest, you're missing out. But there's just an incredible, endless library of fabulous stuff that's been written about the West. And you're talking about the quotes. I'm also quoting movies, and I'll quote Jerry Jeff Walker's songs if we're not careful. But it's there's all kinds of inspirations and truths and half truths and BS about the West, and that's what makes it so fun. It's so exciting.
One of the other great historians of the West, an environmental historian. I had the good fortune to study under at the University of Montana as a guy named Dan Flores, and Dan is now retired and living near Santa Fe, and has remained a good friend. Has written some really remarkable books, contemporary kind of natural histories of North America and of the West. Dan has been a big inspiration for me, and pointed me in some directions, some reading I've probably never done without his encouragement. I'm hopeful. You and I've talked about getting Dan on this podcast to talk a little bit about the American Serengeti, one of his great books. His book Coyote America was on the a New York Times bestseller. I mean, a book about coyotes was on the national bestseller list. I think for 12 weeks or something a couple years back, and maybe longer. He demolished me, but there are some amazing people doing amazing work and research about the West.
No doubt.
To this day.
That's awesome. Well, we'll have to look. I know Ed has a huge list of books too. My friend down in Santa Fe, Haley, she gets a shout out because she's one of our biggest fans on the Land Bulletin.
Nice.
But she's read almost all of those. So it's something we should continue to reference, especially for new landowners, if they really want to kind of understand what they're getting into.
You know, as you got a list that if you're new to the West, you should read these 10 books or whatever it is. And all of them are great. You know,
Yeah. I need to be better. Ken's always reading like 3 books at a time and like bringing up these things. I need to be better. But and Duke, I'd love to know, you were just at Coors. What are you working on now? What's the next kind of?
What am I working on now? I got shows coming up. I've got some commission work. I've got a new gallery in Texas, and then my main gallery, Altamira Fine Art. I have a show with them in Scottsdale in March. So luckily, a ton going on. I got done with Coors and was not in a position to put it in neutral as much as I would. So it's great, very busy. And for me, that's just opportunity to keep scratching at this and figuring out what it is I'm ultimately trying to say or do visually with this love affair I've had with the Western iconography my whole life. I mean, literally, because that's probably been with me the longest of anything is working this out in image making. So lots going on. Grateful for it.
That's awesome. And Woody, I'd love to know, when was the first time you knew, like, okay, Duke's got something, like?
Oh, he was a little boy. We had a house on 7th and Gaylord in Denver, and there was a little low table, kind of like a coffee table in a kind of sunroom, family room, where until later years, we didn't really have much television around. Our parents didn't believe in it much, or just never invested in one. So there was always a lot going on in our house. There was always a lot of noise, and Duke had the good fortune to be able to use drawing as a way to kind of tune that all out and just kind of focus his energies. And I mean, he wasn't 5, and we used to tease him, "What are you drawing there?" They look like little, they look like little squirtles. We said, "What are you drawing, poop?" And he would look at us like, "No, that's a horse, damn it." and he's been drawing horses ever since.
That's awesome. Well, I love both of your brains so much. And I was just so excited to have you both on the show. I mean, you two could honestly have your own podcast. So the fact that you're even here is awesome.
Isn't
so thank
gonna
you
happen.
so much. Yeah.
It's great fun.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Haley.
Appreciate you both. See
You
you next
do.
time.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. To learn more about the ranch real estate market or our ranch marketing process, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter on our website at merranchgroup.com or give us a call at 303-623-4545. See you next time.